Howdy, and welcome to the F1 Hatchet. This is the post-race reaction for the Hungary GP. What was your thoughts on this race? Were you intrigued with this race? Did you think that the back runners qualifying higher on the grid made it more intriguing? Or were you thinking that this was going to be a boring race as Hungary's not known for its passing? For me, overall, I was thinking that this is like a 3, maybe a 4 out of 10, a little bit below average. But what was your thoughts? I thought there was some intrigue at the very beginning of the race and some little bit of intrigue at the end of the race due to the tire strategy and those drivers trying to overcome the performance of the tires at the end of their stints to see if they can actually make it to and pass the car in front of them. But overall, it was kind of a boring race in my view. Please list what you thought of this race below if you feel inclined. As normal, I start at the back of the grid and work my way up through the grid, just giving my thoughts on each driver. So I will start off with Pierre Gasly. As we can see here that both Alpines DNF'd. Now that was unfortunate for the Alpines altogether, as this is the second DNF for both those drivers back to back. And this hurts them in the constructors standings and trying to gain that constructors level. But in the driver's point of view, I think that hurt them as well, as they wasn't any fault of their own. They were doing fairly well. Pierre Gasly qualifying in 15th and Ocon in 12th. So they had a good chance for trying to battle out for some points. Now, unfortunately, Wan Zhou had a horrible start and I think kind of got flustered and frantic and then ended up missing his braking point on turn 1, who then ran into the back of Daniel Ricciardo, who then hit Ocon, pushing him into the side of Gasly, which actually knocked out enough damage for those two Alpines that they had to retire them. Now, Gasly retired on the very first lap, and then Ocon tried to make it one more lap and then retired because he realized there was too much damage on that Alpine. So there's not a whole lot else to say about the Alpines except for we feel sorry for them and they're running, as they didn't really get a chance to do anything in this race. Then we get Logan Sargent, who qualified 20th and ended up 18th. He was having another horrible race this weekend, only gaining those 2 spots because of the Alpine's DNFs. And he basically struggled this whole weekend. He did fairly good on the start of the race, gaining 3 spots, but then couldn't hold on to those as well. And probably 2 of those were the Alpines that kind of were knocked out early on. So not a great race for Logan. It's not a great race for Kevin Magnussen either, who qualified 19th and ended up working his way up to 17th. He did a really good job on the start, gaining 5 positions, but then could not hang on, and that Haas is really seeming to have a horrible time trying to maintain those tires throughout the race. It sounds like they can probably get some race pace in the the qualifying pace, but not the race pace. Like we can see Hulkenberg, working his way up in the grid on the qualifying sessions, but not in the overall race where he drops back into the pack. So it's hard to say where that Haas really is. I don't think that they're much above the Williams at this point in time. Hopefully they can get some improvements for those Haas so they can actually have a better wear and tear on those tires so they can actually get back into those point running positions. Wan Zhou, as I said, had a horrible race. He started off in 5th and ended up in 16th. He had anti-stall or something to that effect at the very beginning of the race, where he ended up having a bunch of cars pass him at the start of the grid when the lights went out. And then I think he got flustered and missed his braking spot because he broke a little bit late and ended up running into the back of Daniel Ricciardo, who then, as I said, pushed his way into Ocon, who pushed his way into Gasly. So he ended up getting a 5-second penalty for causing that collision. And due to that Alfa Romeo not being able to really maintain its position, he just dropped like a rock into this back of the pack and then could not really maintain or anywhere in this race to get him back into the point range. So a really horrible race for Wan Zhou. Hopefully he can recover and not have that over his head next week. Yuki did okay, but not great this weekend. He qualified 17th behind his teammate, Daniel, who just joined that team, and worked his way up to 15th. So he did make some improvements, but overall, I didn't think that he was actually very good, even though he did the best start of most of the people, gaining 6 spots at the very beginning of the race. He's improving a little bit, but I think Daniel's was putting a lot of pressure on Yuki now. I think maybe Yuki was starting to slack off a little bit, and now he's going to have to really start working for it again. So hopefully we'll see great things from Yuki in the future. Nico Hulkenberg, the other Haas, dropped down from 10th spot down to 14th. Was not really his day for this. He didn't have anything that was truly wrong. He was the tires just weren't really working for him during this race. He did pit on lap 17 and then again on 39. But so nothing really occurred to Nico except for just that couldn't maintain those tires in the speed in that Haas. So dropping back out of the points from that qualifying position. Daniel Ricciardo qualified 13th and ended up 13th. He did fairly good, I think, in this overall. He did beat his teammate on qualifying and at the end of the results on the race, so that's good to see. He even got hit in the back, so there was probably some damage to that AlphaTauri during this process. And I know he's part of his questionnaire at the end of the race was talking about that hit, and he was really praying that there wasn't any damage because he really needed to sit and learn this car through this race so that he can get, absorb all the details that he can try to, in the future, get everything out of this AlphaTauri and help maybe develop it a little bit in the back half of this season. But he did overall, I think he did pretty well, being his teammate in both the qualifying and the race results. So good for Daniel on his comeback. Valtteri Bottas, not the super race for him. He qualified 7th and dropped back to 12th. I think he did all he could in that Alfa Romero, but that Alfa Romero just doesn't have the speed that it needs, even though we thought we might actually see something due to the practice sessions and that qualifying where they were both up into that top 10. They just couldn't maintain that speed on those tires throughout this race, and he just dropped back out of the points, unfortunately. Alex Albon did a fairly decent job in that Williams. I think he's getting the most out of that Williams he can. Qualified 16th and worked his way up to 11th. I know it's not where we wanted to see him after that nice weekend where they were up into the points, but they weren't very good on those, the long straights where that Williams is really shines, and this race was not really for that track concept for that Williams. So we will hopefully see a little bit of more in the coming weeks, but hopefully they can make some development changes in that Williams so that they can actually push them way up into the constructors. So that gives us the bottom 10 as we work our way to the top 10. We come to Lance Stroll in that Aston Martin, who is the last person to be a lap down in this race. So we have positions 10 through 20 being lapped by Max, which is kind of frightening in this regard. But he was actually worked his way back up to be behind his teammate, which is good for Lance Stroll. Even though he didn't really shine in this race, I think he did a decent job coming back from 14th to 10th. I do see that he did gain 4 spots at the beginning of the race, so that's good for him, and just basically had a good, clean race the rest of the time, just trying to stay out of trouble, working his way up to 10th. Fernando Alonso, on the other hand, dropped back a position from 8th to 9th. He had a good fight with Perez at the very beginning. I think that kind of wore out his tires a little bit more than they were hoping it was going to, and that kind of pushed him back where he had to let him go and then just kind of baby the tires enough in that first stint to try to keep into that point runnings standard. He had a okay start, gaining only 1 position on the start of the race, but overall I think that Aston Martin just doesn't like these new Pirelli constructions, is what he was saying. So hopefully they can kind of glean some information where they can get the most out of those tires in the future, as they have dropped back into that back lower part of the grid, just into the point. So they did get some points, so that's good, but they're not into the points where they would like to be, or even fighting for the podium where I know Alonso wants to be. Then you have the two Ferraris, who again are dropping back into the field. So yeah, Carlos worked his way back from 11th to 8th, did a phenomenal job at the beginning of the race, gaining 5 positions, and then just trying to stay out of trouble, trying to work on those tires. They said that they shouldn't have the real hard pace with those tires in the mix of all the other cars, where they couldn't really pass during this stint. So he ended up just making it up to 8th overall, where Carlos was. I mean, there was a little bit of debate whether he was actually going to pass his teammate Leclerc, because Leclerc even dropped down to 7th overall, but had a 5-second penalty for the speeding in the pit lane, had a slow pit stop, just kind of struggled through this race in general. He said his, I guess the pace was okay, but it was just going on the tire length and stint. They couldn't really maintain that pace throughout this race. So they were kind of falling back into this, top 10 grid where they unfortunately don't want to be. They need to be pushing and kind of pressuring Mercedes, and now especially with McLaren, that big jump that the McLaren did, it's kind of pushing them out of the way too. So hopefully we can see a little bit more strategy, a little bit more gain from the Ferraris. I think the Ferraris are playing still defensively where they need to go more offensively. We'll see if that happens in the future races or not. We have George Russell, who came in from 18th position up to 6th. I think he probably should have gotten the driver of the day if it wasn't Max Verstappen overall. I know it was Sergio Perez got the driver of the day, coming from 9th to 3rd. But I think George actually did a better job overall in that Mercedes for driver of the day, because we know that Mercedes isn't all of that we want it to be, or they want it to be, in regards to really putting pressure on that front running grid. But for him to actually gain those positions and actually work his way up through that grid on this hard to pass track, I think that was really showing signs of how Russell is in that Mercedes. And I think he probably deserves a little bit more credit than what was given him. Then we have Oscar, who actually qualified 4th and ended up 5th. I know he was a little bit disappointed. He actually did gain and was up to 2nd at the very beginning of the race after there were some issues with Lewis start, and he had a little fight with his teammate and got ahead of his teammate. So he did a really good job there, and then struggled a little bit. And because of the pit stop strategy that McLaren was running, they pitted Lando first, which then ended up undercutting him, getting him into that position. And then he said he was just struggling a little bit on those tires, so he needs a little bit more work done on learning how that car works and trying to study what Lando's doing to gain everything from that car, because he says even with that, he was not any kind of same pace that his teammate Lando was, so he didn't feel super bad about dropping back a little bit on that strategy for the pit stop. But I know he's not where he wants to be, and he can kind of feel those podium positions slipping away, and where he's so close to those. So I'm sure he's hoping to get more out of that in the future. We have Lewis, who dropped back from 1st to 4th. He said this was a horrible race. He didn't enjoy any of this race in his interview, which I laughed at, because I know he had struggled at the beginning, but at the end of the race, when the fuel was dropping down in that car, it looked like that Mercedes was coming alive more, and he was able to start putting pressure on those cars ahead of him, which I would have thought would have given him some inspiration and try to push that, but he didn't seem to like that due to the front part of that race, who's ever really deal with that Mercedes like he has in the past. So overall, those Mercedes I don't think are quite where they want to be. They still need a lot of work done on that chassis to get them competitive to the McLarens and the Red Bulls. So they have a lot of work ahead of them, and hopefully they can get that done without hurting them too much in the upcoming future season of 2024. But he did a fairly good job, I think, in that Mercedes, keeping it where it was. So he ended up in fourth, where Sergio Perez ended up coming from ninth to third. Now, is this expected? I think this is really kind of expected with that Red Bull. I think they have really developed that Red Bull to an astounding degree. And as we can see from Max, there's no really competition from that Red Bull to anywhere else on this grid. No one else can really put a candle to them to actually look at performing anywhere close. So I think it was kind of expected that Sergio would come in from ninth to third, especially in the past several races where he's qualified poorly and had to work his way back up through the field into those point positions. So it's good to see him back on the podium, but I don't think this is really unexpected. It's almost unexpected that he only got to third and not all the way up to second ahead of Lando. So in that regard, I wouldn't have given the driver of the day. Lando, on the other hand, was in third, got to second. I know he was just off on that qualifying position. So not quite where he's wanting to be. But overall, I think it was a good spot for him. And I think he really worked well on this race. So with him and Lewis and Max ahead, having that fight, I think he did a really good job. On the start of the race, he kind of got behind his teammate, but I think he played it cool, worked his way, just kind of stayed in that position and was able to come out on top overall. I know it's not where he was really hoping to be, but with Max and that Red Bull, they've done such a good job that there's no way that he could have caught him in this running. And this leads us to Max Verstappen, who took it all from the beginning. So he qualified second, but he got first pretty quick off the start of the race, as Lewis didn't have the best start, maintained that position, was 8 seconds ahead of Oscar Piastri when Oscar pitted, and then gained, was up to 10 seconds at halfway through this race. And at the very end of the race, he was a whole 33.7 seconds in the lead. So he easily had this race overall in the bag. So there's no point, in saying that Max didn't deserve the driver of the day, as he was clearly the front runner and the one that could just shine in this race, just kind of enjoying a day out, driving the countryside almost in this sense. This is 12 wins for Red Bull, so this is a phenomenal win strategy for Red Bull on their consecutive wins. This actually outdoes McLaren's, and they're on their pace to do several more. So we'll see if Red Bull has any kind of falter or any kind of weakness in the coming weeks in races, as they've already probably shifted all of their strategy for the upcoming season on the development of that Red Bull. It doesn't look like they need to worry about this year at all, as the other race chassis need a lot of work to do before they even come close to competing to that Red Bull. And then we come to the driver standings. So basically we have George Russell jumping up to 5th over Carlos Sainz, and Lando Norris coming in to 8th over Lance Stroll. Whereas Max Verstappen clearly has over 100 points now, ahead of his teammate in the in the driver standings. So not too much longer before he just clinches the driver standings. The only other change we see is Daniel Ricciardo added to the back of the pack here with 0 points behind Nick DeVries, which will probably soon get switched around if we see anything like Daniel's normal driving. And we have the constructors standings, which all stays the same, just with Red Bull at 452 points, whereas Mercedes is at 223. So over double the points of their rival in the constructors standing. So they're going to soon clinch that standing as well. And then we have the upcoming race of next weekend, which is Belgium, which is a sprint weekend. So be aware of that. So you'll have qualifying, on a nice Friday, the sprint races on Saturday, and the GP race on Sunday. And then you can see here, I just put a few stats for this race. So the length is 4.3 miles, run about 44 laps for a total distance of 191 miles. And the record holding is Valtteri Bottas in 2018 with a minute 46. And it was first introduced as a Grand Prix in 1950. So until next week, I will see you on the grid. And if you made it this far, hopefully, please give it a like. And if you want to see this next week, please subscribe so you get notified. Thank you very much. And I will see you on the grid.